Hello, hello. Hi, I'm Jamie, and joining me today will be John, who you'll see very shortly. And we're going to be telling you all about Wader ID. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping for this session. This is a Zoom webinar, so you won't be able to turn on your video or your microphone. You will be able to ask questions using the Q&A box, and which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. We've got time allocated for Q&A at the end of the session, but if we don't get to all the questions that you want to ask, the remainder will be answered after the webinar and shared after the event. The presentations in this whole session will be recorded and will pop up on YouTube in the next couple of weeks. There's no chat function enabled for this event. If you have any technical issues, there is someone from the events team with us today who may be able to help, although for some Zoom related issues, we may not be able to offer any support. Now, I'd like to welcome my colleague, John Carter, who's our wade expert. Hello, John.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hello. So we're going to be talking about waders for the next hour or so. John, why is this a good time of year to see waders?
We have lots and lots of wading birds that come here for the winter. So birds that are bred up in the high Arctic in the summertime, they kind of head south to the relative milder areas of the globe to spend the winter. And while many pass through here for a great staging ground for birds going further south, we also have lots and lots of birds that stay here for the winter as well. And they gather in big numbers, and they're quite accessible, quite easy to see. Kind of very noisy, and then they're in places where we can get to all around the coast and stuff like that. And there's lots of them, lots of different species. So it's a really great time to get out there and enjoy looking at waders.
Let's delve into them. Let's start with the avocet, shall we? Now, this is the symbol of the RSPB. It's a very distinctive bird, and it should be coming up on your screen now. John, can you tell us a little bit about this one, please?
Yeah, I mean, the avocet, as you say, it's a symbol of the RSPB because it's a great conservation success. I mean, they were extinct in the UK for many years, and then they returned in the 1940s and colonised East Anglia. And, it was very much a part of the RSPB's remit to kind of protect the areas that they were colonising. And so we protected it. And now they've gone on to become quite a widespread species. I mean, there's about 2,000 pairs breed in the UK now, which is incredible, really. There's still a bit of a southern bias, particularly in winter. But in the spring and some of the quite an early sort of spring migrants, so they'll start appearing in some of the breeding colonies fairly soon, actually. So they breed, right into northern England and even into the Scottish borders now. So they're doing quite well. They're kind of quite spread around a little bit, but you do get these very large wintering groups in the southwest and southern coast as well. And then they're just, I mean, they're a gorgeous bird. They're elegant, they're tall, they've got this fabulous curved bill and these lovely blue legs, and that stark bright black and white. They're a design dream, really, aren't they?
And you can't mistake them for anything else, can you?
Not really, no.
Tell us about the bill, because what does the bill do? How do they use it?
Well, they sift through the water. They sweep from side to side, a bit like a spoonbill does. You may have seen those on the TV and stuff like when they're doing that. They're kind of sifting through, and they've got very kind of sensitive bills, and they can pick up small invertebrate food items in the water, small fish, crustaceans, and things like that. And they sweep through, and they kind of, as they find the food, they snap it up and they swallow it. So they can kind of work through the water methodically, sweeping left to right and picking up lots of food. It's quite a smart technique, really.
Real conservation success, that one. Let's move on to another black and white one, but they're very different, aren't they? This is the oyster catcher.
Yeah, very different. I mean, this is a kind of a stocky little bird. It's quite brash and very noisy. I mean, avocet make quite a nice sound. They have this kind of bloop, bloop, bloop kind of soft sort of sound, but oyster catchers are quite insistent. And where I live, up near Morecambe Bay, the starlings do great impressions of them. So I often hear oyster catchers. And then I look up, and it's not an oyster catcher at all. It's a starling, because they are so vocal. And oyster catchers breed all over the place. They'll go into farmland, they'll go into roundabouts, they'll go into car parks, flat roofs, as well as the kind of traditional coastal areas that you'd expect them. But they've got that massive, gigantic, orange honking bill there. It's like a carrot.
Carrot.
Yeah, exactly. And those lovely, sort of fleshy pink legs. This one you can tell is in winter. Because it's non-breeding plumage, it's got that kind of white collar on, whereas in the breeding time, they have solid black there. And they've got a lovely bright red eye as well. They're a great bird, and they kind of run around making a racket and chasing each other. They're really good.
Let's hear a bit of that racket now. really kind of evocative of coastal holidays for me. And we're going to talk about the sound that this bird makes in a minute because it's also very distinctive. But let's look at these species to start with. This is the curlew, and this is on the red list in the UK. It's in real trouble. In fact, all of the species of curlew, I think there's around 6 around the globe. They're all struggling. None of them are doing particularly well. Ours, the Eurasian curlew, is in real kind of peril at the moment due to kind of habitat loss, changes that we've made to the countryside, climate changes, all these things affecting it. And the RSPB is involved in lots of different curlew conservation projects at the moment. And we can share a link at the end, but we recently did another online session for members where we looked at some of the work we do with farmers. And one of the nice presentations there was Sam Lee, our project officer, talking about what we do for curlew. And there's a huge variety of the things we do for curlew, including kind of making areas safe for them to nest from predators, publicising them, making people know about them and care about them. And that involves releasing kind of music around them. And there's a knitted curlew hat, if I remember correctly. That's well worth watching separately. But here we're going to talk about the ID of the curlew. And again, distinctive, isn't it, this one, John?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's the largest European wader. It stands out, you know. It's pretty massive by wader standards, and it's a tall, elegant bird again. That very long bill. I mean, I think it's got the longest bill proportionately than any other bird. And that big long bill, you know, is really curved, quite distinctive for probing into the ground and accessing kind of underground invertebrate food. They've also got very, very long legs, which kind of raises them off the ground quite a bit. And again, they're noisy. You know, you get them in moorland and farmland in the breeding season, and again around the coasts and marshes, particularly in the winter. But as you said, the population is in real trouble. You know, almost half the breeding population has gone within the past sort of 20, 30 years, and it seems to be accelerating. And it's a real concern because these birds, many waders are quite long-lived birds, so it takes a long time for us to see the declines in real time. I mean, you know, the oldest curlews are over 30 years old. That's an incredible age, you know, for a bird, really. And lots of these waders live quite a long time, so the population declines are quite, you know, you don't always see it very, very rapidly. So the numbers have been through things like, you know, ongoing monitoring of wintering birds as well as breeding birds. We've seen those sharp declines, and as you say, there's a lot of work going in there to try and stem those declines. It's really important.
Let's hear that sound. It's a beautiful sound. So if you see one of those, and they're easy to see when they are around, they're huge things, then think yourself lucky because they are in massive decline.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at the next two. So the next two, they're also biggish waders, aren't they? But they're not quite as big as the curlew.
Yeah, they're kind of more toward the avocet size. You know, quite tall and stand out quite well. This is black-tailed godwit, one of the two kind of godwits that we get in the UK. This one breeds here in very, very small numbers, but we get lots and lots in the winter. Come down from Iceland. About 40,000 birds winter in the UK. Mainly breeding in Iceland, and the wintering population is actually increasing, even though our breeding population is declining. So it's two different separate subspecies involved in this, but we're not getting into that now. I mean, again, it's a long-legged wader with a long bill, but it's quite plain compared with the very streaky kind of look of the curlew and that down curved bill. This has got quite a long, straight-ish, quite thick bill. And it's got that black tail. You can see even on a stud bird, you can see the black tail there. And when they're in flight, they have black and white wings and a white rump and black tail band, which is quite distinctive from the other godwit, which is bar-tailed godwit, which we'll look at in a sec. But these are very, very long-legged as well. Now, in the summer, they look nothing like this. Now, what I often say to people when they're looking at books and trying to identify waders is almost ignore the plumage very often. And think more about the structure of a bird. How tall is it? How long is its bill? How long are its legs? And you can whittle down fairly quickly, you know, which group of waders you're looking at. And then you can start looking at the more kind of things about plumage. Because in summer, these look nothing like this. They're kind of brick red and grey and spangled and completely different. So if you get the structure in your mind, the leg length, the bill length, the shape of the bill, you can start, you know, wheedling out some of those other birds that you might think you could confuse it with. And that really helps, I think, when identifying waders.
Was also the subject of a big conservation project in recent years. Project
Nature is in crisis, but together we can.
Not sure what that noise was, but that reminds us that nature's in crisis. And Project Godwit was a reflection of that. So Project Godwit was a piece of work with Wildlife and Wetlands Trust (WWT), where we kind of head started, reared these godwit chicks, and it's been incredibly successful. This was a kind of you mentioned it, a subspecies. So this was a race of black-tailed godwits. So we're trying to increase the numbers. And I don't know if you know any of the numbers of sort of nesting numbers off the top of your head, do you, John?
It's around 50 pairs in the UK of
Yeah.
black-tailed godwit. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're doing better than they were, but still fairly low numbers. Now this is the confusion species, isn't it? This one.
Yeah, this is bar-tailed godwit. And if you look carefully, you can see the bars on the undertail coverts there, or on the side of the tail. You can see the black and white stripes that separates and gives it its name. Now, in flight, as I mentioned before, the black-tailed godwit has these black and white wings and white rump and black tail band. These are quite plain above. They do almost, kind of. They just have a kind of a bit of a white on the lower back, but the rest of them are quite plain and brown and streaky. And you can see it's a slightly more streaky bird than the black-tailed godwit. It's almost more like a curlew in its plumage, but it's got this kind of slightly up curved bill. It's a shorter bill, but it kind of turns up at the end. And they've also got shorter legs. If you look above the knee there, the tibia, that's very short on a bar-tailed godwit. So it gives them quite a small, dumpy, short-legged appearance compared with the kind of quite long tibia that the black-tailed godwits have. So even structurally, again, they stand out quite different from one another on the bill shape and the leg length, even if you're not looking at the plumage. So again, just think about those things when you're approaching wader ID. You can see it here a bit more clearly.
Yeah, you can really see that. I mean, this illustration by Mike Landman really shows that kind of curve at the end of the bill, but also in flight. So they're quite distinctively different in flight, aren't they? When you look at those wings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, black-tailed godwit is unmistakable in flight. Nothing really looks like that. And bar-tailed, as I say, it's just got that kind of white zip up the back, the lower back there, from the tail into the lower back, and the very kind of pretty much plain wing, really, as opposed to that big black and white kind of. Black-tailed godwits in a flock when they're flying, the black and white's incredible. It's a really dazzling experience to sort of see that wonderful thing, and they chatter away to one another. Yeah, really nice. Yeah, quite different birds, but you've got to kind of spend the time getting used to looking at these subtle differences. But actually, when you look at these side by side, they are quite different, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the bar-tailed godwit is slightly kind of warmer in colour. There's more brown in that grey, isn't there?
Yeah.
Let's look at a more common bird, which is found all over the UK, I believe, the redshank.
Yeah, redshank. This is one of those birds, along with another bird we'll look at later, dunlin. These are kind of birds you really need to get familiar with when you're looking at wader identification, because these are common birds. You'll see these all across the UK. They breed in kind of damp, wet farmland and fields and meadows and around the coast as well. I mean, again, mostly on the coast in winter, but they will occur almost anywhere. These are pretty widespread, pretty common. I mean, about 20,000 pairs breed across the UK, which means that you've got a fair chance of seeing these somewhere. So again, sadly, decreasing numbers. These are about the size of a blackbird. So again, when I say about size and those shapes and things like that, if you think about a bird you're familiar with, and you think, well, I know what a blackbird looks like. Most people know what a blackbird looks like. So you think, it's a sort of body shape around the same size as that. Well, here you've got that redshank, which is that. And of course, the thing that really helps in redshank is the onomatopoeic name. It's got bright red legs, orangey legs anyway, that really, really help with identifying it. And these are also really noisy birds.
Let's hear the noise. Let's hear the noise. Obviously, that's one in three. So that's not the noise that you were thinking, that there's like a more of an alarm noise. Because I think you were telling me they're called the sentinel of the marshes, aren't they?
Yeah, I often refer to that because whenever you go out onto a marsh where there are redshank, well, the first things to kind of get agitated by your presence, and they do this do 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 do, and everything else kind of looks around. What's going on, So I mean, obviously they're great for alerting other birds to predators and things like that. But it's a bit annoying when you're bird watching and all you hear is redshank.
It is, but that raises a really good point here. And all of these birds that we're talking about, they feed on the ground. They are very vulnerable to disturbance. So you've got to think about this when you're out bird watching or out using the countryside in any other way, really, for any other purpose. So particularly if you're thinking about on the beach in winter when there are waders trying to feed at the shoreline, or in spring and summer when they're nesting on the beach or in grassy fields. They are so vulnerable to disturbance, and it's worth kind of helping to spread the word about that. locally, if you know there's a population of waders that need to feed in winter or need to nest, make sure that people know and are aware. Because the consequences of disturbing them, let's take a winter flock of waders, for example.
Yeah.
If you flush those from the shoreline by walking past them, and if there's lots of other people around with dogs perhaps, or joggers, or people running onto the beach, if they're flushed from their feeding every few minutes, they're not being able to build up the energy that they need to get through the winter or to make those migration journeys that are so important. So we do need to be really kind of mindful when we're out and about of these birds.
Absolutely.
Lecture over. So let's move on to the lapwing. We will come back to this later because we've got some more beach nesting birds to talk about. Let's move on to the lapwing because this is another really distinctive one, and I think there's not many confusion species, are there, with this one?
Not really. I mean, again, most of us should be familiar with lapwing. I mean, but of course, they're nowhere near as common as they once were. So, when I was younger, there were a lot more lapwing than there are around now. And when my parents were younger, there were a lot more lapwing than there are now. There's this shift, and we're becoming slightly disengaged with some of these birds that were common birds. Almost 60% decreases in the breeding population. I mean, that's kind of pretty worrying, I think. And we need to think about how we change that. Now, they use farmland and wet meadows and marshes and things like that to breed in. So there are issues around that, as you say, with the changes in the way that we farm, perhaps in some land use issues, disturbance, recreational disturbance, and all that stuff, really impacting on these birds. But they're a gorgeous bird. They're also known as peewit and green plover, because they are a member of the plover family. And one of the things that gives them plovers away, I mean, this is quite big for a plover. It's about the size of a collared dove. Again, you think about a bird that that you're quite familiar with. So collared dove, sort of medium-y sized bird. I mean, it's got a great big crest on the top of it, which gives it away a bit. And it's black and white and those lovely subtle colours, oil kind of pastel colours in the wings there. But it's got quite a short bill, quite a big eye. That's typical of the plovers. They often feed at night. So they have big eyes so they can kind of see quite well in poor light as well. But they feed differently. They're not probing into mud and into the ground to look for food. They're picking off small invertebrates from just below the surface or on the surface of the ground that they walk on, and they run around on the ground constantly picking away and trying to find food. And again, these are very sociable, very noisy birds. They have a wonderful display flight when they're tumbling and doing their courtship display with this kind of almost electronic sound of a song. But I think you've got some call sounds here, haven't you?
Yeah, let's listen to the call because this is what you might hear now. So that looks like one in springtime settling down on an egg, and they're vocal pretty much all year round. There, and as you say, you'll get them in these flocks in winter, which can be quite delightfully noisy.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, 630,000 wintering birds or something like that. It's incredible numbers. But I mean, that's nothing compared to what it used to be, and they are brilliant. I mean, there you can see it's going down on the eggs, and as you were mentioning before about the danger that these ground nesting birds and the threats to them. Plovers have quite a distinctive kind of way of nesting. Their eggs are very well camouflaged, but they're younger, what they call precocial. So they basically, as soon as they hatch, they can move. They're not born naked like blackbirds and things like that. They've got feathers. They can see. They can run. So straight away they're mobile, which helps them a little bit. But unfortunately, they are very camouflaged, which makes them quite difficult to see. So people can accidentally kind of disturb them or injure them. But they're a lovely bird, and I modelled my hair on the lapwing, quite frankly. So.
The lapwing is a style icon, as are you, John, obviously. Now they're part of the plover family. Let's look at the grey plover, which I think has got the most delightful large eye.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame, really. I mean, we're going to talk about some of these birds looking quite dull. Their non-breeding plumage is quite subtle compared to, these things in breeding plumage. They're known in North America as black-bellied plover. They've got this really fabulous black belly that goes right up the neck into the face, lovely spangled grey mantle and on the back. They're really striking. In winter, they're kind of a little bit less splashy, really, but they're still quite distinctive. They're a stocky little bird, they're probably about the size of a blackbird again. That kind of chunky, short-legged, kind of size. They run around the ground, that big eye again, that plover eye. They've also got quite a stout bill. That's quite a distinctive thing with grey plover, that chunky bill. And that round head, short, plump body, that's very distinctive of plovers generally. Now, when they fly, they've got an added kind of identification feature. They have these jet black armpits, or the axillaries, as we call them. And when they're flying, no other wader of that size and shape has anything remotely like that. So they're really distinctive in flight.
All these birds have incredibly different bills, don't they? When you think of like the avocet and the curlew and the redshank and the lavender with the short bill, and it's like it all kind of obviously relates to the food that these birds will be picking up. And we're going to talk about the turnstone a bit later on, which has got fascinating behaviour.
Yeah.
Let's look at the golden plover, another one that forms these big flocks in winter, makes great noises, great sounds. Although we haven't got to play for you today, so you'll just have to. We'll send you a link afterwards. You can look it up, but this is something that forms flocks of thousands. I've seen them at our RSPB Frampton Marsh Nature Reserve, and they call it the plover cane there because you get these big clouds of these birds, often mixed in with lapwing. They get on quite well with lapwing, don't they?
They do, yeah. They often inhabit the same kinds of big, flat, open areas of mud and marshland and things like that. But yeah, golden plover, again, in the summertime, they have a completely different plumage. They're kind of much more striking, black, white, gold, really, really quite, and they breed up in the uplands. But yeah, the golden plover in the winter, you can still see there, lots of lovely spangled gold on the mantle, on the head, on the back there. And a bit like the grey plover, it's quite a stocky little bird. It's quite stumpy. It's a bit smaller than it's probably more like a starling kind of size, maybe, but it's a bit longer. But that bill is nowhere near as hefty. You can see there that it's still got that big eye, but the bill is quite small by comparison. And when you see them together, they can be quite variable as well. So you will get quite pale birds that make you think, oh, is that a grey plover? But that structure, that shape, that bill weight can really kind of sort out your problems with identification. Again, when they fly, none of that black on the wing kind of armpit effect. Yeah.
Let's look at the final plover now, which is also quite distinctive, although there is possibly a summer confusion bird, but you don't need to kind of worry about it this time of year.
No, that's
ringed
right.
plover.
Yeah, little ring plover is a breeding bird that only comes here for the summer and tends to like gravel pits and reservoirs, kind of more urban kind of wetland areas. But the ringed plover, which is this bird here, is a bird of coast mainly, and like sandy and pebbly beaches. And again, it's one of those problems that you were talking about earlier, Jamie, where they nest on the ground. They have fabulously camouflaged eggs. They have fabulously camouflaged youngsters, and they like the same places that we do in the summer. The beaches and things like that. And so they suffer an awful lot from disturbance. Recreational disturbance is a real challenge for these birds. And so in many parts of the country, we're putting around, kind of cages almost around them to protect them and cordoning off areas to keep them nice and safe. They have a great technique for luring away predators as well with these nests. They affect a broken wing or injury kind of posture, and they walk off slowly, calling a lot to draw attention to themselves. And as a predator follows them, thinking they're an easy catch, it lures them away from the nest, and at the last minute they fly off and leave the predator with absolutely nothing. It's a great thing. But these are quite distinctive. Again, quite a small bird, starlingy sized, that lovely little short bill, orange and black, a big eye again, really quite noticeable. Bright orangey yellow legs, and that lovely black collar, white collar kind of and face pattern is really distinctive. You're not really going to see too many birds that you could confuse that with. Certainly,
let's move on to the knot. Now, my favourite fact about knot is that the Latin name is Calidris canutus, and even the name itself, knot, is named after King Canute, who famously tried to hold back the tide. And this bird, you will see doing that. It's there scuttling up and down, trying to keep in pace with the water coming back and forth at the shoreline so they can get to the food in the mud, and that's how it gets its name. But these are lovely little things, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they're incredible. They're incredible birds. I mean, they're again, in winter, a little bit less flashy than they are in the summer. Then some of they have these lovely kind of brick red tones and things like that. A lot of these Arctic birds do that, and they come here for the winter a little more subtle. So they're very grey. And the kind of you see they've got these markings all the way down the side of the body there, down the flanks, these little chevrons. So they're not kind of grey and white. In the middle there, you can see a smaller bird just tucked away with its head in there. That's a dunlin. And it's a similar bird. So you can see the size difference there. Your knot is kind of a blackbird size again, and the dunlin's kind of more like a sort of sparrowy type of size. But you can see that the dunlin has a kind of a clear white sort of body underneath the brown of the back, whereas the knot is quite patterned. Also, the knot's got quite a kind of medium length bill. It's about the same length as the length of its head. And it's got a small eye, which separates it from the plovers that we saw earlier. The legs also are usually kind of grey ochre kind of colours, so they kind of stand out quite well because the Dunlin's leg is very, very dark. It's just kind of jet black. So they're a little bit different. And they do mass in these huge, huge numbers, and they're incredible. They kind of form these murmurations on the coast. Tens of thousands of the birds. Absolutely incredible.
They really are spectacular. Should we have a look at? I think we might have a video of this. Should we take a look at that? See what they do. This is Snettisham, RSPB Snettisham on the North Norfolk coast. And I love in that video how they suddenly got the memo that they were going one way, then they were going the other way, and it's probably in reaction to the tide or a predator or something, some other threat. But they're brilliant. I get them really confused with Dunlin, which we're going to look at now. So unfortunately, these Dunlin have got their heads tucked away, which is, and again, this is a problem you often get when you're bird watching. We're recreating exactly what the experience would be like. So how do I tell a knot from a Dunlin, John?
Okay, right. Again, we'll go back to size, really. I mean, you're talking about something somewhere between a sparrow and a starling size with a Dunlin, whereas the knot is like a blackbird size. They're quite different structure there. The chunkier, bigger birds are knots. Dunlin are quite small. These, again, like I said earlier with the redshank, but if you learn Dunlin, you're going to pretty much be on top of your game with waders. This is the one to get familiar with. Then you'll spot something that stands out. So they're quite small. There's that lovely kind of contrast between the belly and the sides of the body there, which is pretty much just white, and then the kind of brownish, greyish kind of colours of the mantle and the head. So with the knot, they have those chevron patterns I mentioned earlier. So they're kind of almost mucky-sided as opposed to clean-sided. The Dunlin is Dunlins vary a little bit in size, but that's why I said sparrow and starling, because some can be quite small and some would be kind of a little bit bigger. And the bill length varies as well a little bit, but the bill kind of droops down towards the end very often, unlike that kind of straightish bill of the knot, and those short, very black legs, quite thin legs compared to the kind of quite sturdy legs of a knot. It takes a bit of practice, but these are the birds you kind of, if you go to the coast, you go to Morecambe Bay, you go to the Wash, you go to the South Coast, you go to all sorts of parts of the UK, bits of, North Wales and all that, and you can see these birds side by side and get good looks at them and familiarise yourself with those, and then you're going to be on top of it completely.
There's another bird that sort of hangs around the same area, I think, which is the sanderling, which I think is a little bit smaller.
Yeah,
Is
a
that,
little bit.
or is it about the same size as the
Well,
Dunlin?
they're a bit, they're kind of a medium, sort of smallish, sort of kind of similar to Dunlin in size, really, but they've got a shorter bill. They're even cleaner than the Dunlin are. They're really kind of quite pale grey on the back, not quite so browny grey, and that lovely white bit on the bottom, those little black legs. One thing that's unique about these things, it pretty much, they don't have a hind toe. If you get a good look at one running across the sand, they don't have a hind toe at all, which all the other kind of similar waders do anyway. And these look like clockwork toys, the way that they work along the surf, a bit like that you were saying about knots, turning back the tide. Suddenly skitter along in little groups along the breaking water, really quite distinctive. But yeah, certainly not as easy to find or in anywhere near the numbers that you get Dunlin and knot in. So if you see these things, they're quite distinctive. Again, that very dark kind of back end of them as well. The wings kind of form this very black kind of point at the end. But yeah, they're a lovely little bird. Yeah.
They look cute. I think that's a very cute picture, isn't it? It's just
They are cute.
little things. We've got some more similar species to look at now, similar to each other, not to the sandling. And these are snipe, jack snipe, and woodcock. Let's start with the snipe, which has that extraordinarily long bill.
Yeah, I mean, now you're talking before about bill lengths and things like that, and how different waders have that. I mean, obviously they're all evolved to access different food, So if you've got long legs and a long bill, you can get a bit deeper into water and get deeper into the mud to get food. If you've got short legs and short bill, then you're going to be getting food that those other waders can't get. So they've all kind of got these niches. Now, snipe here, it's a different kind of habitat, that it's not so much on the kind of beaches and things like that. You'll find it more in kind of wet grassland, marshlands, they breed in farmland and in the uplands, in moorland and things like that. So that pattern helps them kind of fit in very much with their surroundings. That bill length is enormous. I mean, it's huge. I mean, it's really quite distinctive. Again, a big eye, bit of nocturnal feeding going on with these birds. But that back, the stripes on the back, the lovely kind of detail in the upper parts of these birds really helps them blend in with their surroundings. And they've got kind of greeny, greyish legs as well. They're really quite smart birds. People are often surprised to see them so well. They're really quite common. There's probably something like about, over 1 million birds winter in the UK, which is incredible, really. And you normally just see them flying away from you. They have this zigzagging flight, and they just have this kind of like rasping little call as they go, and they fly quite some way, and then they'll disappear off. And that's usually the best view you get of them. So if you go to an RSPB reserve or any other nature reserve, you often can see, certainly this time of year in some of our wetland reserves, snipes sat right in front of the hide, giving great views, and people are really thrilled to see these.
They are, and I was so thinking about this that often you go to a hide and you'll see everything else up there, and the snipe is often the last thing. Certainly for me, it's the last thing that I see, and someone will have to point it out to me. So, do you know there's a snipe just below the window or something like that? And when it's tucked away and it's not moving and it's the same colour as all its surroundings, it's quite tricky to find. Now let's move to the next. We've got another picture of a snipe. So this is more moving into. I know we're talking about winter, but we're moving into kind of springtime. They do a fascinating kind of courtship behaviour. And they make the weirdest noise, don't they, John?
They do. I mean, and I mean, they have a vocal noise as well, but you're referring to the drumming, aren't you? The courtship drumming sound, where they do this flight. It's an incredible flight, where they're showing off, obviously, in the same way that any other birds do courtship. They're trying to attract a mate. They're telling other males that this is their area, etc. But they don't make this sound through their mouth. They make the sound through their tail feathers. And the tail feathers are designed such that when they do this particular flight, they make this sound as the air passes through the feathers. It does this kind of like kind of sound. And it's really odd, and they do it often at dusk, because it's quite eerie if you're in a place and you've not heard it before. It's quite an unusual sound to hear.
It is, and I remember an experience a few years ago in Iceland. So in Iceland, they're everywhere. They're they're over even kind of urban areas. It's like it's just constant noise, and you have to keep reminding yourself that it's a snipe and not some weird alarm or something. It's a snipe. Now they've got a smaller relative that is similar but not quite the same. The bill's a little shorter, isn't it? This is the jack snipe.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite a lot shorter as the bill. I mean, it's almost, again, we were talking before about knot and things like that, about measuring the length of the bill compared with the sort of the depth of the head. I mean, the jack snipe's almost the same thing. Its bill length is almost like the width from its nostrils to the back of its head. Whereas on the snipe, I mean, it's a way bigger piece of equipment than that. Jack snipe are smaller. Jack does mean smaller. These are about the size of kind of a small starling, if you will. And again, these things stay very, very close to the ground. They're very camouflaged. They're really difficult to flush. Unlike the snipe, which will get up a few meters away from you and fly off zigzagging, calling away. These things, you practically step on them and they go up at your feet, and they fly at a very short distance, and then they're back on the ground or into a ditch somewhere, and they sit tight. And they're just delightful. They're very much a bird watcher's bird. They're quite hard to see. They're quite hard to find. When you do see them in the open, which is very rare, feeding, they have this lovely kind of bouncing kind of way of feeding. They just do this the entire time. It's really odd to observe, and they're really lovely. That's quite distinctive. But yeah, they're probably a lot commoner than we think they are. Probably more of them. There are a few plumage characteristics that tell them apart, but they've got a dark crown stripe rather than a pale crown, things like that. But generally, the bill length, the size, the behaviour will give them away, really. Yeah.
The young birds in this sort of trio is the woodcock, which can turn up in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. They get very confused by our urban lights while they're migrating, and can end up in city centres and shop doorways and gardens and balconies and all sorts. But they are incredibly well camouflaged as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and these have a very different kind of lifestyle to the snipe and jack snipe. They don't breed on open moorland, and they don't winter in the salt marshes and things like that. These are woodland birds essentially, and very much nocturnal birds. You can see that big eye again. And they've got a kind of longish bill again for probing in, for getting worms and things like that out of the ground. These will sit on the ground in the woodland during the daytime. Often, you may flush them as you're walking on kind of woodland path edges and things like that, and they'll fly off, and they're much bigger. They're almost like half half owl, half wader. You know, they're kind of rounder wing, they're kind of fluttery. They don't really fly in that rapid way either. They're quite different birds, but even though they're closely related, their habits are very different, and they're really hard to kind of see. You don't often get views of them on the ground. If you do, you're very, very fortunate. We see them around here. I mean, here at Leighton Moss, where I work, we get all these 3 birds here, but they all occupy very different bits of the reserve to some degree. And I'll often see woodcock as I'm leaving the reserve at the end of the day. They'll be flying into the reserve from the local woodlands and the nearby golf course and things like that, where they've been sitting up all day in the leaf litter. They're coming in to come and feed on the wet areas here and probe away there. They're a fabulous bird, yeah.
Let's look at all 3 together. You can see the woodcock there. I think for me, the woodcock, it's where the eye is. You just look at it and go, where's the eye? Why is this right at the back of the head? So you can see how different they all are, and including those bills on the snipe and the jack snipe. Now, I think we were saying when we were planning this session that the snipe, you can see the bill length is something like more than 3 times the length of the head, whereas this jack snipe is only about the same length or slightly longer than the head.
Yeah. And again, they're accessing different food. They're in the same kinds of areas, you know, wetland, boggy, marshy spots, but they're able to take advantage of that, of the different food at different levels within the kind of substrate, the mud, the marshes, etc. Yeah.
All 3 stunning species, very well camouflaged. Let's look at the turnstone now, which has an interesting behaviour, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, you were talking when we were chatting the other day about some of the different food items it eats. It's been known to eat all sorts of things. It eats carrion, it eats all sorts of stuff. It's quite a broad palate. But the main thing about turnstone is it's named after this lovely habit it has of literally going around turning stones and pebbles, and it runs along often on pebbly beaches and rocky coasts, flipping over bits of whether it's seaweed or stones in order to find things that are creeping around underneath, little sea lice and all those kinds of things. And they're very successful. It's a good method. It works well for turnstone. They seem to be doing, there's about 43,000, something like that, winter in the UK, all around the coastline. And they're quite, again, a starling-sized bird. In summer, and in the spring, when they start molting through, they become almost like a tortoise shell colour. They're really fabulous. Again, really striking birds. But in winter, a little more subtle. Got a lovely black kind of breastband, kind of patterned backgrounds, orangey legs, and that distinctive little kind of bill that they use for that. And they'll often roost in quite big numbers on kind of groins and on rock pools and things like that, and on piers and things where they can kind of huddle together. They're a lovely bird, again, long-lived. The oldest one's about 20 years old. I mean, it's incredible for a bird of that size, really, to live that long. They breed many in the far north and then come down here for the winter.
Let's look at the purple sandpiper, which inhabits the same kind of space, doesn't it? Same kind of habitats.
Yeah, again, likes rocky coasts, harbours, those kinds of places. You know, likes and it blends in very well. It's purple, a little fanciful. I mean, it's not entirely purple, is it? You know, but it's got a kind of purplish sheen to that kind of that stone rock granite coloured body, and that's helps them really blend in on those coastal rocks, because often those wet coastal rocks they have a kind of purplish hue to them, you know. And these things that really blend in really well. Sometimes you've got to look hard for them. Sometimes they'll be amongst those turnstone flocks when they're roosting in particular. And often in small numbers, you know, they don't ordinarily get big flocks of these things. They're quite solitary by comparison. Though I did see a group of 40 odd recently when I was up in Northumberland all together in a harbour there, and I was quite amazed to see so many together. Again, they're kind of a subtle bird, you know, but when you think about it, they're a bit like a dunlin in a way, you know, but they've got this kind of speckled, almost thrush-like underparts there, and that bill and those legs, that's orange, that bright orange is real giveaway. And often when you'll see a purple sandpiper asleep, you think, what is it? Is it one or is it one? And then if you just check the leg colour, or if it gets its head out, absolutely characteristic. It gives itself away in no time at all. But these are quite hardy. They'll stand right on the rocks and let the surf pile over them. It doesn't seem to care. They're just quite happy working that tough coastal kind of frontier. Yeah, they're great.
There's the tough birds of the coast. Now, Ruff are really interesting, and disappointingly, because we're in winter, they won't be in their stunning plumage, which involves sort of a ruff around the neck, sort of hood up around the head. They're spectacular, but you may well still see them in this plumage. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, the Ruff is one of those tricky ones. It looks a bit like lots of different waders stuck together. It's like a sort of sort of kind of taxidermist kind of experiment in some ways. He's got a knots bill and and a red shanks body shape, and they are quite odd. They're very, very variable as well, which doesn't help. When you're trying to identify birds. I mean, some of the females can be as small as a dunlin, and some of the males can be kind of approaching godwit size almost. I mean, they're really quite variable, and the leg colour can change a little bit. Very often they'll have a two-tone bill like this one here, which is all dark. They'll often have a pale base of the bill, but they often have this white base around the feathering around the base of the bill, which really stands out. Most waders don't have that. That's if you've got that kind of white mask around the base of the bill, that's a bit of a giveaway. They also have this lovely kind of very big feathers on the back. It's quite a loose arrangement of feathers. The broad feathers, very pale tipped. So the dark feathers with some fringes. So they look very scalloped, which is quite characteristic of Ruff. And they're quite an interesting thing. They've got this slightly decurved bill, but that size variation can make them quite tricky. There's not that many. I mean, probably maybe about 1,000 or so winter in the UK, but we get many thousands moving through in the autumn. So they're quite a common passage bird. Again, in spring, probably fewer, but lots in the autumn. But then there's a few scattered around. I mean, they use washes, I think, and bits of the fens are probably the best places to look for these. But they can turn up pretty much anywhere around the UK where there's kind of good wetland habitat, and other waders will often drop in with those. But they're really nice. Mainly in England, rather than the other countries. But a bird that's really worth seeking out and enjoying looking at, because they're quite fascinating birds. Yeah.
They really are. Now, I will just give everyone a reminder that we can take your questions to the Q&A box. This is probably your last chance to fire a few into us, so we'll have a look at those in a moment if any come through. But one thing you were mentioning, wetland habitats there, I think this session has reminded me just how important wetlands are for wildlife. They're important for people as well, because they help purify our water, they help mitigate flood risks, they do all sorts of amazing things with carbon storage. But for the waders, the wetland is the absolute key. They've got to have those marshy places in between water and land, the coast, the estuaries, the wet farmland, the marshes, lagoons, reed beds, pools. We need those kind of habitats, don't we? They're so precious.
Yeah, and the UK is really, really essential. I mean, for lots of birds, you think about birds that breed in Siberia, in Finland, in Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, Arctic Canada, they move through the UK, and they need those places, those staging posts where they arrive to be in good shape and to have lots of food and places to rest. And you mentioned earlier, Jamie, about disturbance and stuff, and it's a real problem on around the country where you've got birds that are feeding, as you say. They need to feed, they need to store that energy. Particularly in winter, it can be really quite cold at night. So if they're having to burn lots of energy flying around through disturbance and things, that's a real problem. And then when they're roosting at high tide, they keep getting disturbed again. They're burning that energy that they need to save at night, and it can lead to serious kind of implications about survival overnight. Birds can perish in cold winters because they just haven't been able to store the energy, because we relentlessly chased them and bothered them. So they do need places where they can feed and when they can rest without disturbance, and it's really important. And again, as we alluded to earlier, the breeding, all these birds nest on the ground, and they're at risk there wherever they are, whether it's a rocky beach or whether it's a pebbly beach or a sandy beach or a field or a moorland. The human interaction on all these habitats and all these places is such that sometimes it can really benefit these birds, but also without us really taking care, we can cause really untold damage. And most waders are in decline. That's just a fact. We are seeing, as you said earlier, about curlew, godwits, things like that. They're just tumbling. They are in free fall, and we have to do something about it. I mean, and having nature reserves that are there to protect these things is brilliant. But there's more than that. We can't be at every stage of these birds' lives. We have to. So by giving them safe havens in winter and whatnot, that's great, but they also need help where they breed, and things like climate change, unfortunately, is impacting on the tundra, which is impacting on their ability to sort of high productivity in breeding. So there's lots of challenges for waders. We're doing lots of work on it with our partners and other organisations to make sure that we kind of understand the threats that they face, but we'll keep doing it.
I'll just add as well that everyone watching here today is an RSPB member, so we should thank you all, really. So thank you so much, because without you, we couldn't do all this work. running over 200 nature reserves, working alongside other landowners like farmers. We've got some great farmers that we work with who are battling to get these birds back onto their land. We work across the flyway with BirdLife partners in other countries on that flyway, on those routes. So without you, we wouldn't be able to do all this. So thank you. We have got a question. I think we'll just look at the last two slides and we'll come to the questions at the end, if that's okay, in case there's any more come through. So please do send us your questions if you've got any. This is a short list, and there are many, many RSPB nature reserves where you can get good views of waders, but there's just a selection now. And we've tried to pick some from all across the UK. The ones I tend to know are the ones in East Anglia, and you know quite well. You know a lot more than I do about our nature reserves, but you know a few of the ones up north, don't you? But there's a good range there, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, most RSPB reserves, particularly those that are focusing on wetland in winter, you will see waders of some sort on all of them, pretty much. And they're all worth a visit. And then, of course, we also provide havens for them in breeding in the uplands and places in Geltstone and Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales. We're busy doing lots of work to protect every aspect that we can of their life cycles. But yeah, these are all good places to start. Yeah.
So get out and see them this winter if you can. Finally, there's some other resources here that may be useful for you. We've run some other sessions a bit like this. We've got a really kind of basic look at how to watch birds. So a webinar recording that you could watch. And we've got a bird guide on the website. And if you join as a member, I think you're all members here today, then that obviously gives us a massive boost. Now we have got some questions. I'm going to go with Bev's first. So Bev has said, what time of day is it best to see waders, and is this linked to tide levels? I suppose it depends on the wader, doesn't it?
It does, and it also, yes. I mean, that's a really, really great question. And tide, we're talking about coastal birds, obviously tides are really important. If the tide's way out, then the birds are scattered far and wide over the mudflats, eating away, and so they're quite tricky to kind of see well. As the tides come in, it pushes the birds closer toward you, which is great because you get better views of them as they feed around the edges or as they kind of start to roost. But then at high tide, roost is really great. That's a really good opportunity to kind of stand and see them. As long as they're not disturbed, they will gather in large numbers and you can get really great views of masses of them, and you'll get mixed flocks of birds there. So that's a really good place to go and find a high tide roost. Again, I grew up in Morecambe Bay, so I'm used to seeing these wonderful spectacles of waders, and I know how great it can be. So yeah, if you go to a coastline, choose your times right, the tide's pushing up in winter, and you'll get, and Snettisham, if you go there at the high tide, you get those big numbers of knot coming in, don't you, on the North Norfolk coast there.
It's worth doing your homework with these. I think that's the key point. So work out the tide times. Snettisham, I think on the RSPB Snettisham webpage, I think we do have a bit of information about the kind of expected dates for those spectaculars, and if it's there at the moment, but usually if it's not there, you can contact the reserve team or get in touch with us. But yeah, you have to kind of prepare and just make sure you're going at the right time. So thank you very much for that question, Bev. What else have we got? So we've got one. Lisa and Claire, events team, would you mind popping back on the slides and showing us that list of reserves again, please? Because we've got a question that says, could you give the reserves by county? This is a good test for us.
Oh, blimey.
The question says, I don't recall where many of these are, but we'll do our very best. If we can get the slide back up, and we'll see what we can do. I know that the ones that I know are certainly in East Anglia. So we've talked about Snettisham, which is in Norfolk, Frampton Marsh, which is in Lincolnshire. Just getting the slides up. Belfast, well, that is in central. That is bang in the centre of Belfast. Blacktoft Sands, that's up north, isn't it?
It's East Yorkshire and the Humber estuary there. Yeah, it's that's good. Bowling Green Marsh is Devon, I believe.
It's down south. It's definitely down south.
It's southwest. So I'm pretty sure it's Devon. Burton Mere is Cheshire, but it also is part of the Dee estuary. So it's Cheshire and it's part of North Wales as well. Part of that reserve complex. Conway is North Wales. Frampton, as you say, is Lincolnshire. Marshside is Lancashire. The Ribble estuary, which is a massively important site for wading birds and wildfowl. Mersehead is Dumfries and Galloway, just on the other side of the Solway there. Nig Bay is Scotland. It's East Scotland. Pagham Harbour is Sussex. South coast, southeast coast, and Snettisham is of course Norfolk.
Norfolk is such a hot spot for watching coastal birds. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to start wrapping up now. We've got a few more events like this planned, free online events for RSPB members. We've got 4 which run this month on Big Garden Birdwatch. So we start with the sort of absolute basics of how to do your birdwatch. And if you're already a part of that stage, that's fine, because we're going to go into a lot more detail. We've got Peter Holden coming on to one of the sessions, who was the founder of Big Garden Birdwatch back in 1979. So he's going to kind of give us some of his reflections and tell us about the history. We're going to have Ben Andrew, who's our expert photographer, teaching us how to take photos of garden birds. We'll be talking to our wildlife team, who can tell us about keeping your garden birds healthy and safe. All sorts of other interesting little details about that. So do look out for those. We've also got one coming up on gull ID, which will be in February. So we'll be looking at kind of winter going into spring gulls, because gulls can be quite tricky. And I know that a few of you have been in touch with us in the past and said, can we do one on gulls? Now, how do you find out about them? Because they're all different dates. Well, if after this session's finished, you'll get a little survey pop up on your screen. I think there may be a question on there that says, would you like to hear from us about future events? So if you say yes to that, we'll make sure that we tell you when these events are coming up, and you can register your place for those. More coming up throughout the rest of the year. We're going to do a series on migration. I think we're going to do a few more on kind of farming. So it's really interesting, and we love that you come and join these and ask questions, and then we can put these up on YouTube afterwards to share with more people. So thank you very much for supporting us with these. John, anything else to add about waders? Have you? That's all your wader knowledge, I think, now, isn't it? We've drained out of you.
Oh, there's plenty more where that came from. I mean, we haven't even touched on green sandpiper, wood
No,
sandpiper,
that's
common
true. For
sandpiper,
another time.
and all
For
the
another time.
rarities.
Yes. Well, yeah, spring waders, summer waders. There's so much more to. I
Yeah.
think they're just a lovely group of birds, and really enjoy going out and seeing them. Make the most of these winter months, and go and enjoy your waders. I'd like to say a massive thank you to John, to Claire and Lisa from the events team, who've kept this going from behind the scenes. And thank you to you for watching. Please do fill in the survey afterwards and let us know your thoughts. If there's any other webinars you want us to run, if there's any other ideas for sessions, or if you'd like to hear about the future ones. Thank you very much, and goodbye from me.
Cheers.